Similar on the outside. I think they turn you off. Yeah.
All right, Jabosai. A good night, the Piskatava, good kvittel. It is Baruch Hashem such a schus to be able to be here together, to learn together, Mirat Hashem, on Hoshana Rabbah night, Erev Shmini Atzeres. Such a schus, Baruch Hashem, to be here together in the sukkah. We thank our sponsors for tonight's shir. Wait 1 second, sorry. We thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Baruch Hashem, for Tafshin Pehei, the Tilson family of Eretz Yisrael, Schus Besoros Tovos Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for Tishrei, Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Peretz Moshe Ben Avram, David, Avram and Shane D. Kelman, in memory of their parents, Strom and Bernice Kelman, Alexander Frederica David. And we thank also our Tikkun Leil Hoshana Rabbah sponsor, Mel and Karen Ram, Li'ilui Nishmas, Mel's grandfather Shmuel Ben Avram, whose 80th yahrzeit is tonight. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah, the family in Nechama. We thank all of our sponsors for their generosity, and of course we take the opportunity to wish Yoni Frager a very happy birthday. Baruch Hashem, a very happy birthday. There's a gift table set up in the back this time.
No gifts.
No gifts. All right, so let's get started. We have a lot to do tonight. Baruch Hashem, a really incredible and beautiful daf ahead of us. Tonight's daf, to actually remember again, so tonight we're doing Leil Hoshana Rabbah's, we're doing Hoshana Rabbah's daf. So Hoshana Rabbah's daf, tomorrow morning's daf is Kuf Chaf 120. So we are picking up Emir Hashem on the bottom of Kuf Yotes Amud Beis 119b, the last line. So if you remember again, we left off in the middle of a discussion over here that there was an incredible miracle that happened for Benos Slavchad, that even though they did not marry until later, or the Gemara calls 40 years old, there was a tremendous miracle that occurred, that Baruch Hashem, they were still able to have children. So the Gemara compares the miracle of Benos Slavchad to the miracle of Yocheved. What happened with Yocheved? So the Gemara says, "Nasalam neski Yocheved kidichsiv." This is incredible. You'll see, by the way, just always the confluence of events of Gemaras that we have, Baruch Hashem, over the course of. Really, you need a seat. You can't hear? Here, come. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll try to. I don't think it's working. I think they turned everything off. Yeah. Okay. So in other words, the Gemara says over here, like Yocheved. What happened with Yocheved? So the Gemara says, "Dichsev vayelech ish mi beis Levi vayikach es bas Levi." So the pasuk says that a man from Levi came and he married a woman from Levi. So we'll say, remember again, of course, the man from Levi is Amram. The woman from Levi is Yocheved. So the Gemara says, top of Kuf Chaf 120a. Afshar bas mea ushloshim shana the kar labas. Now again, as we're going to see in just a moment, Yocheved was 130 years old. So could it be that a woman who's 130 years old would be called a bas? In other words, it says Vayelech ish mi beis Levi, a man from Beis Levi came and married a bas Levi. So bas Levi makes it sound like she's a young woman, but again, as we're going to point out in just a moment, Yocheved was 130 years old. So again, even if you want to say 130 at times of the Chumash is not like 130 today, it's still old. So what's the pshat? So the Gemara says, Dam Rabbi Chaim Bar Chanina zu Yocheved. This refers to Yocheved. And what happened with Yocheved? So the Gemara says, Shahorasa b'derech v'nolda ben Achomos. So she was conceived on the way down to Egypt. In other words, again, this is when Yaakov and his family are coming down to Mitzrayim after Yosef revealed his identity as the viceroy. So everyone's coming down to Egypt. So Yocheved was conceived on the way down, but she was born in Egypt itself. Her birth was in Egypt, but her conception was not. So what do you see from here? Obviously, if she's conceived on the way down to Egypt, so again, the Rashbam does the math, but you see that Yocheved is 130 years old. So how could it call her a bas? How could it call her a bas if she's 130 years old? So the Gemara says something so beautiful. So you see from here that a miracle happened and that Yocheved became young. She physically exhibited signs of youth. What happened to her? Nis'adein habasar, her skin became soft. V'nispashta kamatin, her wrinkles were, I don't know what the right term is, ironed out. smoothed out, unwrinkled, right? V'chazar hayofi l'mkomo, and her beauty returned back to its place. So we'll say. So the point over here that the Gemara is making is, you see that we have precedent for this concept of righteous women experiencing almost this rejuvenation of youth. So the same way that Yocheved was 130 years old, but a miracle occurred that ultimately again returned her to her physical youthful state, so to Benos Tzlafchad also were returned to their physical youthful state, so to speak. The Gemara says, Vayikach, but 1 second. Why does it say that Amram married her? So Vayikach sounds like he's marrying her for the first time. But remember again, both say, you know the story, right? Remember again, Amram was married to Yocheved. Then what happens? Paro decreed, Kala bein hayilod hayora tashlichu. Paro said, throw the boys into the Nile. So at that point in time, Amram pretty much divorced his wife. He separated from her. He said, what's the point of establishing a Jewish family if all Paro is going to do is throw our babies into the Nile? So remember again, that's when Miriam came along, and Miriam said to her, Miriam says to her father, your decree is worse than Paro's, because Paro only decreed on the boys, but your decree ultimately again is on the boys and the girls. So Amram listened to his daughter Miriam, and he remarried Yocheved. That's the pasuk over here. Vayelech ish mi beis Levi vayikach as bas Levi is referring to Amram remarrying Yocheved. To which the Gemara says, so if he's remarrying her, why does it use the lashon of vayikach? Right? Vayikach sounds like he's marrying her for the first time. It turns out over here that Lamaisa. Is there a chair there? Right. Good. It turns out that Lamaisa, really again he was remarrying her. So what happens? So the Gemara says, Vayikach vayachsumi baile. So why does it say that he married her? Can you?
Very, very close.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry. Right, so why does it say? Right. So why does it say Vayikach? It should say Vayachzor. He remarried her. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda bar Zevida Melami she'asa b'maaseh lekuchin. So we'll say this is beautiful. This is beautiful. Rather, what does it teach us? It teaches us that Amram remarried. Maaseh lekuchin means he remarried her. He performed another wedding for her. Because listen to this. Hoshiva bat Pirion. He put her under a bridal canopy. Aaron Miriam mishorim lefaneha. Shabbos say this is so beautiful. Aaron and Miriam were going ahead and singing in front of Yocheved. So we'll say you just have to imagine this scene for just a moment, right? So here, and just to understand the context, right? So Paro's throwing the baby boys into the Nile. Amram says to establish a Jewish family is an exercise in futility. He separates from his wife. His daughter Miriam says, "Father, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're compounding the problem. At least Paro's only goes around the boys. You're being goes around the boys and the girls. So Amram remarries her. So now this is the remarriage. And what's happening by the remarriage? What's happening by the remarriage is it's a major simcha. And the children, Aaron and Miriam are singing. If you look at the wide line of the Rashbam, the first wide line, Mishorin, mitoch simcha shaya asid Moshe Rabbeinu latzes mehen, v'hainu dichsev ladas maya asalo. So remember again, they're celebrating. Now why are they celebrating? Because remember again, Miriam was the one who prophesied that her father. Oh, thank you. Works? So Miriam was the one who prophesied that Lamaisa, again, her mother was going to give birth to the person who was going to provide the salvation for Klal Yisrael. So the Gemara says as follows. So therefore, can you imagine the scene? Then Moshe, literally again, Miriam and Aaron are going ahead and dancing in front of Yocheved and. Perfect. Thank you, Ali. Thank you. So Miriam and Aaron are dancing in front of Yocheved and Amram. I just want to point out, the Gemara says, Malachei Asharis Omrim, and the Malachei Asharis, what do the Malachim say? Eim Habanim Smecha. We'll say how incredible. That pasuk in Hallel we've been saying every day. Who is the mother of the children who is happy? So the Gemara posits that's Yocheved. That's Yocheved. Why do they call her the mother of the children? Because at the time that she quote-unquote remarried Amram, ultimately Miriam and Aaron are dancing in front of her. I just want to point out just how profound this Gemara is. You know, we're learning this Gemara, mamish like Erev Shmini Atzeres, Erev Simchas Torah Eretz Yisrael, when we're coming up to the yard site of so many precious Kiddoshim. So just understand that the strength of Klal Yisrael is the ability to continue to celebrate, and the ability to continue to dance, and the ability to continue to be with simcha, even in the midst of incredible tsar. Just understand what's happening over here. As they're having this chasana, what is Paro doing? What is Paro doing? Paro's throwing the baby boys into the Nile, right? He's continuing to do that. And yet again, what are Amram and Yocheved doing? What are they doing? They're celebrating a chasana, they're building. Let's say people are asking, what should we do this Simchas Torah? It's not a shaila. What do we do this Simchas Torah? We dance harder and we sing louder. The answer to the events of Simchas Torah Tafshin Pei Dalid is not to mute the simcha of Simchas Torah Tafshin Pei Hey. That would be a victory for our enemies. The avod of this Simchas Torah is you dance until your feet give out, and you sing until you no longer have a voice. And when you're in the circle, you hold the hands of the person who's in front of you and in back of you just a little bit tighter. And when you have a hakafa, you squeeze that safer with all of your might. That's the avodah. That's what a yid does. What does a yid do in the face of adversity? We double down on simcha, and we double down on living a meaningful and impactful life. So as literally, again, the Jewish babies are being thrown into the Nile, what are Amram and Yocheved doing? Lahavdil, they're renewing their vows. They're renewing their vows. They're building a Yiddish family, and Aaron and Miriam are there dancing, and the entire mishpacha filled with a sense of hope and optimism for what is going to be an incredible and beautiful future. And Abosai, that is our avoda in these days as well. Incredible to have this Gemara. So the Gemara says, Minan HaKasuv, Derech Gidulas, and the sorry. Minan HaKasuv derech gidulasan, the kan derech chachmasan. So the Gemara says as follows. So later on, so we'll go back to Benos Slavchad. So there are two different ways that Benos Slavchad are mentioned in the Torah. So the Gemara says later on, the Torah mentions them in age order, derech gidulasan. But here, when it comes to discussion about the Yerusha, so the Torah counts them derech chachmasan, kind of like in order of wisdom. Misayeli Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami, this is actually fascinating. B'yeshiva halach achar chachma, b'mesiba halach achar zikna. When there is a yeshiva, now the Rashbam points out over here that yeshiva means any gathering that is for the sake of adjudicating halacha. When you have a gathering that is for the sake of psaktin, adjudicating halacha, or clarifying something in Torah, you give kavod to the senior sage, even if he's not the oldest person there, right? So kavod, when it comes to Torah, is based on knowledge, not based on age. Yet, when it comes to mesiba, what's mesiba? The Rashbam says, shal mishteh v'odil nisuin. When it comes to a celebration, how do you give kavod? To whoever's oldest. So I will say, so just like to give you an example, right? You had a simcha, who gets to bench? Okay, so leaving aside kohanim, not leaving aside kohanim, right? So obviously kohanim take precedence, but you give it to the oldest person. But if he's not the biggest Talmid Chacham, it doesn't matter. When it comes to social things, we give primacy to age. When it comes to halachic things, we give primacy to wisdom over anything else. Incredible. But this is only so if the greatest sage there is, like head and shoulders above the next person, or the next oldest person there. The oldest person there is much older than anyone else. In other words, in order to give primacy to wisdom over everyone else, so that person has to be mamish, like considerably wiser. To give primacy to age over everything else, that person has to be considerably older. Tanat Rabbi Shmuel, Benos Slavchad Shkulos Hayu. The daughters of Slavchad were all equal in piety. Shneimar, Vatiyana, Havia Echal Kulan. They were all treated the same. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Benos Slavchad, Hutshuli Nasa Dechal Shvatim. So this is beautiful. So the Benos Slavchad, now we'll say, we've been kind of skirting this issue a little bit. Now we're going to tackle it. Who did Benos Slavchad marry? So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel that Benos Slavchad were allowed to marry whoever they wanted. They had the right to marry whoever they wanted. Shneimar, L'tov Beineim Tiana L'Nashim, because the pasuk says, marry whoever, literally again, marry whoever you want. Elamani Makayim, Ach L'Mishpachas Matavim Tiana L'Nashim. So here's the problem. So also, we're going to see right here that there are two contradictory inferences. On one hand, the pasuk says, Benos Slavchad, marry whoever you want. But then it also says, make sure to marry within the tribe of your father. So which one is it? Which the Gemara says, Eitza Tova Hisyon. So in other words, it was good advice. What was the good advice? The good advice was, look, you know what, at the end of the day, this was a big deal. Daughters getting Yerusha, it was the first time that it happened. So to kind of make sure that just to minimize any potential tension, what should you do? Ideally, marry within your tribe. Did you have to marry within your tribe? No. No, they could marry whoever they wanted, but it was an Eitzah Tova to try to marry within the tribe itself. Incredible. Mosiv Rabbi raised the kasha, and more alehen. So the pasuk says Emor Alehem. Now, the pasuk over here, Emor Alehem Darsechem Kol Ish Asher Yikram Nikem L'Chol Zachem Ela Kadoshim Asher Yakdishu B'nei Yisrael LaHashem V'Tumaso Alav V'Nichasan Nefesh Shehi Milfanai Ani Hashem. So this is talking about over here consuming karbanos in a state of ritual impurity. So the Torah says if you go ahead and you consume karbanos and you're tamei, so there's kares, penalty of kares. So look what's happening over here. So the Gemara says as follows: Emor alehem. Now the way the pasuk is phrased is say unto them. So what could we infer from this statement of say unto them? Lo osin ha'omdin al har Sinai. So Emor alehem refers to the people who are at Har Sinai. So in other words, that generation. So Moshe Rabbeinu, the group who Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to, that's ultimately who this halacha applies to. L'doros seichem. Then when it says for future generations, elu doros haboim. That refers to future generations. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so here's what's interesting. So the Torah seems to be going out of its way to what? The Torah is going out of its way to go ahead and tell us that this halacha, specifically about eating kachim, sacrificial items in a state of ritual impurity, applies to both, we'll call it the fathers, meaning the generation of this halacha was given to, and subsequent generations as well. So the Gemara says, why? Why don't we generally assume that when the Torah says something, who does it apply to? Who does it apply to? Everyone, right? Everyone. So why does Torah have to go out of its way over here to talk about, again, halacha l'maisa that applies to the fathers and the children, to which the Gemara says, mitnei, to teach us the following principle. Sheyesh ba'avos masha'in bebanim, v'yesh bebanim masha'in ba'avos. To teach us, this is incredible, that there are certain things that apply to the children that don't apply to the fathers, and certain things that apply to the fathers that don't apply to the children. In other words, Rabbi said that there were certain halachas that only applied generationally, did not apply for all time going forward. Incredible. So let's give some examples of that. For example, the chol bas yoreshes nachala. So for example, it says by the fathers, in other words, by the generation of the desert, it says that any daughter who inherits, what should she do? She should marry into her own tribe. So the Gemara wants to suggest that the obligation for a daughter who inherits to marry into her own tribe was something that only applied episodically in the desert, did not apply for future generations. The harbi mitzvos netstavu barim shalom netstavu. And we'll say there are many mitzvos that the children were commanded to do that the fathers did not have an obligation to do. What was an example of that? So Rashi points out there, for example, Trumas, Maestros, Shemitah, mitzvos hatluyos ba'aretz. Right? So ultimately, again, mitzvos are dependent on Eretz Yisrael. So those were commanded ultimately, again, to the children who entered into Eretz Yisrael, but were not commanded to the fathers. Now are commanded in the deserts. Good. So says, therefore, hutzrach lomar avos, hutzrach lomar banim. So now that we see, by the way, interestingly enough, so now that we see that there are examples of certain mitzvos that were said to the fathers, not to the children, or to the children and not to the fathers, that's why you see that sometimes you do need the Torah to go ahead and go out of its way, to go out of its way and highlight when a halacha applies to everyone. The Gemara says, Katani mihas, what do you see from here? Katani mihas, ba'avos hu omer, v'chol basi reshes nachala. What do you see from here? What it does sound like from here is that halacha l'maisa, at least for the generation of the desert, there was an obligation for girls who inherited to marry into their own tribe. Well, that contradicts what we just said before, because what did we say before? We said benos slavchad could marry whoever they wanted. It was just an eitzah tova, a good piece of advice to marry into their own tribe. Here it sounds like no, they had to marry into their own tribe. It's just for future generations they can marry whoever they want. So the answer is that you're right. For other girls that applied, but not for Benos Slavchad. Benos Slavchad were able to go out and marry whoever they wanted, but Einachinami, for the generation of the desert, if other girls would have inherited, Halacha L'maisa, they would have to marry into their own tribe. Amar, so the Gemara says, Amar, ba'avos hu omer, v'chol basi reshes nachala. So Mara said, by the fathers. In other words, the generation of the desert, it says, which if you ever have a girl who goes ahead and inherits property, so she has to go ahead and marry in her tribe. So the Gemara says, ba'avos in, bebanim lo. Sounds like this only applied in the desert, but does not apply for future generations. To which the Gemara says, my mashma. So where do you get that from? Amrava Amrikra zeha davar. Davar zeh lo yehei noeg ella bedar zeh. Because it teaches me again, zeha davar. When you say the of zeha davar means this is the halacha. Now the way the Gemara interprets that is, this is the halacha when? For this generation, and doesn't apply for future generations. And therefore, again, the Gemara is bringing this as a proof that for Beno Slafot, for the generation of the desert, if a girl inherited property, so she had to marry into her own tribe. But for future generations, if a girl inherits property, she can marry whoever she wants. Amarle Rabba Zuti, the Rava, Shiel Miata, but using this logic, Zah Davar, Tishchute Chutz, Hachanami, Delo Yehei Noeg Ela Bedar Zeh. So we'll say there's kinds of shchutei chutz. What's shchutei chutz? Shchutei chutz is if you shecht karbanos outside of the Beis Hamikdash, so there is severe penalties, kares, for offering up karbanos outside the Beis Hamikdash. We'll say if you think about it also b'derech hashkafa, what's shchutei chutz? We'll say if you think about it like this, what's the job of a yid? What's the job of a Jew? The job of a Jew is to be an or lagayim, a light unto the nations. Right? I think, sometimes when we reflect back on the last year, it's very hard to contemplate that we're coming up now in the yard site of the Kiddushim of Simchas Torah. I think one of the things that, I don't know, at least I felt many times over the course of this year is, like, to heck with the world. To heck with being a Ar Lagayim. Like, who needs that? No one cares. No one wants it. No one's interested. And maybe the avoda of our dar is to circle the wagons and just to go ahead and build ourselves up. And what happens to the world happens to the world. But of course, it's not true, right? It's our sacred mission. It's our sacred mission to be out in the world, and it's our sacred mission to influence the world. I will say, but there's a danger with being an Ar Lagayim. What's the danger? See, in order to be an Ar Lagayim, what do you have to do? You have to be out in the world. But you have to be careful, if you're out in the world, about how much of the world you let back into you. You have to be out in the world, but how much? Because what happens? If you're too much bachutz, what happens? Shchutei chutz. Shchutei chutz. Sometimes a person can be geshacht. Sometimes, again, you can lose everything by being too much bachutz, by being too much on the outside. So this is the tightrope that the yid always straddles. On one hand, I need to be out in the world. We have a mandate to be out in the world because we have a mandate to go ahead and accomplish things in greater society. On the flip side, we have to master this art of being out and being insular, being bachutz, but not too much bachutz, because then that becomes shchutei chutz. So how do you influence? How do you impact? But at the same time, not allow the chutz to come back into your pnim, because the moment that the chutz comes into my pnim, that's unfortunately shchutei chutz. So the Gemara says, what about shchutei chutz? It says Zahadavar. Now I will say, what did we just say before? That whenever the pasuk says Zahadavar, what does Zahadavar mean? It applies only for the generation of the desert, right? Or for what we call the Avos, the early generations, and not for now. So what do you tell me? Shchutei chutz only applied in the desert, doesn't apply for future generations? To which the Gemara says, Hachanami lo yehei noeg ela bedar zeh. So what do you think? It's only going to apply in the desert and not to future generations? Shani hasam dichsiv ledarosam. No. Shchutei chutz is different. Why is it different? There's another pasuk. What's the other pasuk? For future generations. We'll say Amud Beis. Good. So therefore, because it says L'dorosam, therefore halacha l'maisa, that's indicative that shchutei chutz applies even outside, even in future generations as well. Incredible. All right, we'll say Kuf Chaf Amud Beis 120b. Sammy, how am I doing on time?
18 minutes.
Good. 18 minutes left. Okay, let's go. On the clock. By the way, it's part of the tochacha to run even when no one's chasing you. I just want to point out, right? And so nice. So the Gemara says as follows. So we'll say, here we go. Zehadavar. So we'll say this is interesting. So remember again, the problem we have now is the Gemara created a paradigm. What's the paradigm? That whenever it says Zahadavar is a limiting phrase to teach you that this particular matter of halacha only applies for the generation of the desert, doesn't apply for future generations. So we'll say, so what about this Zahadavar? Now remember again, this is Vaydaber Moshe al Roshei Amatos Lebnei Yisrael more Zahadavar Asher Tziva Hashem. So we'll say, so this is talking about over here about hafaras nadarim, right? The ability to go ahead and annul vows. So you're going to tell me that the concept of vow annulment, at least by again a Talmid Chacham, only applies for earlier generations, doesn't apply now? Amrali, no. Hahu yolif ze mehasam. No. It's different because there's gzera shava of ze from hafaras nadarim to shchutei chutz. That just like shchutei chutz applies for all future generations, so too again annulment of vows applies for all future generations as well. To which the Gemara, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says, first of all, the top Rashbam, Zeh hadavar d'Rosh Hamatos, Tichsiv, Vayidaber Moshe Rosh Hamatos, Bnei Yisrael Lemor, Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem, Ish ki yidor neder. Hachanami lo yehi noig ela hafaras nedarim ela b'dor hazeh b'tmiyah. So again, could it be that hafaras nedarim only applies ultimately the injection of the desert? So next Rashbam, Yolav Zeh, the hafaras nedarim mizeh d'shchutei chutz. So we make a gzer shava of Zeh from hafaras nedarim to shchutei chutz. Just like by Shchutei Chutz, the Zeh is in the same pasuk as the Dorosam, which teaches us that the prohibition of Shchutei Chutz applies for all future generations. So too, the Zeh ultimately again, or Zeh Davar Af Hafaras Nedarim applies for all future generations as well. Amalei, Hahu Yoliv Zeh Mehasam. So the Gemara says, "Hai nami leilef zeh mehasam." So if that's the case, the same way that we learn out that zeh mehasam, why not go ahead and learn out? The Rasham says, "Hachanami the ian hasabas nachala." So it says also zeh by inheritance, by the inheritance of a daughter. So why don't you say that? Why don't you make a gzer shava of zeh from hafaras nedarim ultimately to nachala, to inheritance, and say that just like halacha l'maisa, again they have to marry into their own family, their own tribe, by the earlier generation for future generations. I should say differently. Just like Zeh, by Afaras Adam refers to all future generations, so too the Zeh by Nachala, specifically that a daughter has to marry into her own tribe if she inherits property, she'll survive for all future generations, to which the Gemara says, Hi Mai. So Bishlama Hasim, it's Trichale Gzera Shava. So I understand in the case, ultimately, again, between Afarzam and Shchutei Chutz, you need the Gzera Shava, Hacha Lemai Itztrich. But I will say, by Nachala, why do you need the Gzera Shava? After all, Lishtik Kra Mine, Va'ana Yadana Diladorosu. So I will say, here's what's interesting, is Halacha Lemaisa, Halacha l'maisa. At the end of the day, the pasuk could have said absolutely nothing by nachala, and had it not said something by nachala, I would have understood that what applies. And I was supposed to say the default is whatever halacha applied in the desert also applies to future generations as well. So don't say anything by nachala at all, and the default would be that halachos of nachala apply for all future generations. So ultimately, again, but the fact that the pasuk said zeh hadavar when it didn't need to indicates to us that what? That the halacha concerning nachala, i.e., that if a daughter inherits property, she has to marry into her own tribe, was only a halacha for the generation of the desert, and is not a halacha for future generations. Incredible. So, my gzer shava. By the way, what is this gzer shava that she's talking about? This saying, here we go. Ne'emar kan zehadavar, v'ne'emar lahalon zehadavar. So we'll say it says over here zehadavar, and it says over there also zehadavar as well. So the Gemara says, Ma lahalon Aaron ubanov v'chol Yisrael. So we'll say, so just like over there, it refers to Aaron, his sons, and all of Klal Yisrael. Afkan Aaron ubanov v'chol Yisrael. So again, just like by Shchutei Chutz, ultimately you're both say who is particularly enjoined, who is particularly prohibited from Shchutei Chutz? Aaron, his sons, and all of Klal Yisrael. So to Afaras Nedarim, who's involved in that? Aaron, his sons, and all Klal Yisrael. Okay, so the Gemara says, Umakon Rashi Matos, Afla Halon Rashi Matos, and just like over here, it's even referring to the heads of the tribe. Ultimately, again, here also it's referring to heads of the tribe. We'll say, take a quick look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says, Magzer Shava, Tiafinan Zedin Nedarim v'Zed Shchutei Chutz Me'adadi. So what we're specifically referencing over here is the Gzer Shava of Zeh between Shchutei Chutz, the prohibition to shecht karbanos outside of the Beis HaMikdash, and ultimately again Hafaras Adam, an annulment of vows. So the Gemara says, why do you need this Gzer Shava? So look one more at Rashba. Ma lahalon b'Shchutei Chutz ksiv behu daber al Aaron ve'al bonov ve'al kol bnei Yisrael af b'nedarim Aaron ubanov kilu ksiv bohem v'chol Yisrael kin nefarish l'kaman. So we'll see. So just like by Shchutei Chutz enumerates Aaron, his sons, and all of Klal Yisrael. So too again, by annulment of vows, it's going to also include Aaron, his sons, and all of Klal Yisrael. Now what that means, we'll see in just a moment. Furthermore, the Gemara says, just like by Shchutei Chutz, it says Rashi Matos. Ultimately, again, so too by Hafaras Nedarim, it's also going to be Rashi Matos. So what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, So what exactly is this coming to include? So here we go. Amar of Achabar Yaakov Lomar Shafaras Nedarim B'Shlosh Hadyotos. Shabbos say, so what exactly is being included by Rosh Hamatos? What is that coming to teach us? It's coming to teach us that Hafaras Nedarim could even be done with 3 Hadyotos, which again are 3 regular people. Back to our Nedarim days. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Lomar Shafaras Nedarim B'Shlosh Hadyotos. Rashbam says. The Rashbam says, "Dichsev lo yachal dvaro hu eino mechel aval achirim matirlo." Kigon shlosha tahavu bezin kedarmin besanhedrin va'afil l'shmuel damar hasam shnayim shedanu dinein din ela shnikru bezin chatzif hanimili dinim amanis aval mishrei iser neder lo sagi pachas agimel. So we'll say it's coming to teach us that Allah l'maisa, if you want to annul nedarim, you need a minimum of 3 people. Now again, the nice part is you could have even 3 regular people. You don't need necessarily Talmidei Chachamim or great rabbanim. Even 3 Yotos, even 3 regular people, ultimately again is going to go ahead and allow for Hataras Nedarim. Here's the problem. By Hafaras Nedarim, it uses the lashon of Roshei Hamatos. So you're right. We were just saying before that Allah is coming to teach me that for Hafaras Nedarim, for an element of vows, you could even use 3 regular people. Here's the problem with that, which is it says Roshei Hamatos. Roshei Hamatos sounds like what? Sounds like what? That you need chashuva people, right? You need chashuva people for Hafaras Nedarim. So what's going on over here? The Gemara says, "Kida Amrav Chista, Amrav Yochanan, biyachid mumcha, hachanami biyachid mumcha." So it teaches us that there are actually 2 different mechanisms for annulment of vows. What are the two different mechanisms? 2 different mechanisms: either 3 people, right? 3 people, a beis din, and that beis din is comprised of who? Anyone, right? Anyone. Or you could have annulment with 1 person, as long as what? Then 1 person ultimately again is a mumcha. Mumcha means someone who's an expert in these matters. Umakan. So we'll say, so again, by the way, I just want to point out, just so we get all the shonos right, so remember again, the 2 different types of annulment of vows, right? Hafaras nedarim and hataras nedarim. So hafara is what a husband does, right? Hatara is what a beis din does. So remember again, the fundamental difference is how does a husband annul his wife's vow? How does he do it? He just says, mutalach, mutalach, mutalach. He doesn't, even 1 time is good. He doesn't need a reason, he doesn't need any type of Pesach, nothing. He just has the ability to go ahead and fundamentally eradicate it. That's different than Hataras Nedarim. Hataras Nedarim usually needs some type of Pesach. We remember from our Nedarim days, some type of opening, Charata, or something else. Okay, I'm just pointing out because the Gemara is using the Lashon over here of Hafara and Hatara a little bit interchangeably, but it's important to know that halachically they are very different things. Good, let's go weiter. Umakan Rosh Hamatos, Aflalon Rosh Hamatos, Lamay. So now, what is it coming to teach me when it says, just like over here, by Hafaras Nedarim it's Rosh Hamatos, so too ultimately again by Shchutei Chutz it's also Rosh Hamatos. What is that coming to teach me? So the Ma'ilchus, Amar of Sheishes Lomar Sheyesh She'ela Behegdish. So we'll say this is incredible to teach us. This is fascinating that there is She'ela Behegdish. Now, what does that mean that there's She'ela Behegdish? So we'll say take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. This is fascinating. It's in the wide lines, 4 lines down. Sheyesh She'ela Behegdish, Kimo Sheyesh She'ela Benedarim. The Benedarim ksiv lo yachal dvaro v'adin l'chol hekdeshos shimshachat kadshim b'chutz v'nischayiv kares v'achar kach halach eitzel chacham lahakti lo hekdesho. Let's say, get ready for this. This is absolutely wild. Watch this. So let's say I go ahead and I shech the carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash. You know what could happen? Sometimes you're just so excited for that carbon, right? So again, I end up shech more to pay attention during Daf Yomi, because you never know when you're going to find a piece of information that is going to help you out when you are in a bind. Here is one of those pieces of information. So now you think to yourself, I shechted my carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash, kares. There's a way out. What's the way out? The way out is to go to a chacham. And the shaila is, can I somehow, now remember again I will say, so making an animal hekdish is a neder. It's a form of a neder, right? In other words, when I'm makdish an animal, I essentially take upon myself a neder to bring this animal as a carbon. So now I shechted it. So now I have a great chab. I'm going to go to a chacham, and I'm going to get my neder annulled. Now, what happens if I get my neder annulled? What happens? It turns out that what? That it wasn't hektish. If it wasn't hektish, then what? It wasn't shchutei chutz. So what did I do? Barbecue. That's what I did. A barbecue, right? The Cholamite barbecue, right? I sponsored Kiddush, right? I sponsored Kiddush. That's what I did, right? So the Ma'aseh says, isn't that incredible? So listen to this. So the Gemara says, so back to Rashan for just a moment. So look at the words now inside. 4 lines in the wide lines. So just like again, you could have a vow annulled, right? By b'nedarim. So if I went ahead and I shechted a carbon outside of the Beis Hamikdash, and Chas v'Shalom now became liable to kares, the achakach halach etzel chacham lahatir lo hekdesho, and I come to a chacham, and the chacham is matir my neder. Now, both, and I remember again, in order for him to do that, he would have to find the Pesach. You know, had you known that you weren't going to have that animal for your second day's Yom Tiv, would you have been makdish it? So let's assume again he finds me the opening. He finds some type of opening of remorse. So isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible that there is a way to get out of I transgressed. Chiyav kares. And now again, if I'm able to go ahead and be matir neder, I can go to the chacham again. I just want to point out, Tuna is saying absolutely amazing. I know you thought everything was amazing until now, but listen to this. Will say, what is this? What is this? This ability to go ahead and undo your mistakes is tshuva. It's tshuva. Will say, it's Hoshana Rabbah. It's Hoshana Rabbah tonight. Tonight is the end of din. Tomorrow, right? Hoshana Rabbah. The Zohar brings down the piskin, the petek, the little piece of paper with my gzardin, with my decree for the year, is being delivered from the Beis Din Shel Malach. Hoshana Rabbah is the chasimas hadin. It is the closure of judgment. So I will say, to understand what a gift this is, you may be like me, and you may realize that there are still many things that you did not do tshuva for. And so you might be thinking to yourself, it's too late. It's too late. It's already Sukkot. It's Hoshana Rabbah. What good osai? So what do you see from here? Yesh she'ela b'hegdish. What are you talking about? You could be chayv kares. And yet there's always tshuva. There's a work. Rabbi say, whatever I've done in life, there's always tshuva. Now, here's the caveat to that. You may not be able to undo things that you've done to other people. That's a reality, right? We do things in relationships, and sometimes no matter how remorseful we may be, you can't always undo relationship damage. But that is the unique nature of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That whatever I do, I can undo. That is the unique nature of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Whatever I do, I can undo. A chiyav kares, the worst punishment possibly imaginable. And yet, even in a chiyav kares, you could find a way to undo it. I will say, Halel Hoshana Rabbah, incredible. So the Gemara says, so let's go back. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry. So we'll say, so therefore again, the Rashi Matos comes to teach me ultimately again that there is she'ela by hekdish, that you could go to a chacham, and even if you did shchutei chutz, you could be matir neder on your carbon and go ahead and retroactively. It turned out that I never shechted a consecrated animal outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Beis Shammai de Amri ein she'ela behekdish. What about? But let's say here's the problem. Beis Shammai holds there's no she'ela behekdish. Beis Shammai says you could be matir neder for almost anything else. What you can't be matir neder for is hekdish. If you consecrate something, you cannot be matir that type of neder. You cannot be. So according to Beis Shammai, I'll just point out, by the way, you should know that this machlokes yesh she'ela behekdish or ein she'ela behekdish is not just halacha, it's profound hashkafa. So what the thing is like this: when a person reaches a certain level of kedusha, the shaila is, do they have any more questions? Right? All of us are filled with so many questions. Why does Kadosh Baruch Hu do this? Why does Kadosh Baruch Hu do this? Right? Things happen in the world. We see suffering. We see difficulty. We see tzaddik v'ralo, rasha v'tovlo, and we're filled with so many questions. See, here's the shaila. When you reach a certain level of kedusha, do all of your questions go away? Maybe when you reach a certain level of holiness, there's no longer any questions. So I want to point out, it's a machlokes. It's a machlokes. I'm sorry? Or maybe the questions go away. Like if you notice, by the way, Beis Shammai holds, ein she'ela behekdish. Beis Shammai says, when you reach a certain level of kedusha, there's no more questions. There's no more questions. Not that you don't say you have the questions, but the truth is, I recognize the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to such a point that it's not even worth it for me to articulate the questions, not because I understand everything, but because I have such a heightened appreciation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that there's no more questions. Ein she'ela b'hekdish. Versus the first opinion, which is Beis Hillel, says no. Ein she'ela b'hekdish. Right? Even at the end, no matter how Kaddish you are, no matter how holy you are, there's still questions. I will say, who's right? Who's right? Who's right? The Pashtus, it would seem to be it's Beis Hillel. Ein she'ela b'hekdish. How do we know this? Moshe Rabbeinu, at the end of Parashat Shmos, says, Lama hari osala amazeh, lama zeh shalachtani. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Kadosh Baruch Hu, why are you doing bad things to good people? Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Kadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe Rabbeinu saw Kadosh Baruch Hu by the sneh, and yet again it appears that yesh she'ela behekdish. Incredible. So according to Beis Shammai, he holds ein she'ela behekdish. So what does he do with the Gzeir Shava? This nan Beis Shammai omrim hekdish taos. Hekdish is very interesting. We'll say. So Beis Shammai says hekdish taos. What does it mean hekdish taos? If you accidentally consecrate something, look at the Rashbam. He says, "Ked mefarish hasam keitzad amar shor shachar shiyatza mi beisi rishon hariu hekdish v'yatza lavan." Right, so let's say again, a person says, the first black ox that walks out of my house is going. What an ox is doing in your house is a different discussion, right? But the first black ox that comes out of my house is going to be hekdish, and it turns out that a white ox walks out. Beis Shammai omrim hekdish. Beis Shammai says it's hekdish. Hekdish, right? But you said black ox. No, you said first ox that walks out of your house. That's it. Beis Hillel omrim eino hekdish, and Beis Hillel says it's not hekdish. Gemara my time Beis Shammai the yolfi tchilas hekdish misof hekdish matmur afilu betos. Okay, so we don't have to get into all the mechanics over here. But Beis Shammai says, so this time Beis Shammai omrim hekdish tos hekdish. So Beis Shammai says, even if you consecrate something by accident, it's still consecrated. Or Beis Hillel omrim eino hekdish, and Beis Hillel says it's not hekdish. It's not hekdish. Hekdish requires kavanah, and therefore again the absence of kavanah does not create kedusha. The Gemara says, "Hi, zeh v'zeh my avdilei." So what do they do with the gzer shav of zeh v'zeh? So the Gemara says, "Hi, zeh v'zeh my avdilei." Zeh hadavar de shchutei chutz mi barilei. I'll tell you the following. We need it for the following halachas. So zeh hadavar of shchutei chutz, right? So zeh hadavar of shchutei chutz. So that teaches me what? Ala shochet tu chayiv ve'no chayiv ala molek. This is actually very interesting. So Rabbi says it's good to know. By the way, also, sometimes over a 3-day yontiv, you might run out of stuff to talk about at the table. It's always good. These are conversation starters, right? By the way, interesting fact. You're only chayav for shchutei chutz if you shecht. If you do malika, you're not chayav for shchutei chutz. Once I remember again, what's malika? Malika is the thumb, right? Kohanim would grow out their thumbnail, and what they would do is they would, by bird offerings, you don't shecht the bird offering. Instead, what they do is they hold the